I was born in a beige house with plastic shutters and a lawn that was trimmed too often, as if my father was trying to mow down the chaos that lived inside. We lived on Norwood Drive, in a part of Indiana where people smiled with their teeth and gossiped with their eyes. From the outside, we looked normal. Inside, I was raised by wolves in khakis and pearls. My name is Ethan Vale. I was the only child of Douglas and Margaret Vale, a pair of God-fearing, discipline-loving suburban monarchs who ran their home like a kingdom built on fear, control, and the silent currency of guilt. They believed in order, in tradition, in rules. They believed pain was educational and obedience was love. I was not raised. I was engineered. Be grateful, my father would say when he canceled my 13th birthday because I forgot to vacuum behind the refrigerator. We're teaching you what the world won't. My mother was colder. She weaponized affection. A kind word, a soft smile. Rewards handed out rarely, and only when I performed according to script. My childhood was a checklist of expectations. A's on report cards, polite silence at dinner, church attendance every Sunday without fail, and zero deviation from the path they'd paved. But what made it worse was how performative they were in public. To the neighbors, they were saints. The Vallas are such dedicated parents, Mrs. Donnelly next door would say, admiring how we all showed up to church in matching tones like we'd been styled by a catalog. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what life was really like. I was warned early that dirty laundry stays inside the home. Breaking that rule meant losing privileges, meals, or sleep. I learned to lie with a smile before I could multiply numbers. They never hit me. Not physically. But there are other ways to scar a child. And I wore mine under my ribs and behind my teeth. My emotions were locked away because they were always ammunition. If I cried, I was weak. If I got angry, I was disrespectful. If I disagreed, I was ungrateful. You owe us everything, my mother would whisper when I dared to ask why I wasn't allowed to apply to any out-of-state colleges. Do you know what we've sacrificed to raise you? And I did know. They reminded me daily. Every meal I ate, every electricity bill, every bottle of shampoo became part of a ledger they never stopped keeping. At 16, I stopped believing they loved me. At 17, I stopped caring. At 18, I left. But I didn't just leave. I escaped with intent. My plan wasn't spontaneous. I'd spent years preparing. I knew I'd never get money from them for school. So I applied for scholarships behind their backs, forging my father's signature on financial aid forms while he was passed out in his recliner. I got a job at the library during my junior year, pretending it was for extra credit, and saved every cent. By the time I graduated, I had a full ride to the University of Illinois and $3,200 hidden in a shoebox beneath the crawl space in our attic. They were furious when they found out. My mother screamed for 2 hours. My father punched a hole in the garage wall and told me I was dead to them. Then they made me sit at the kitchen table and listen to a lecture about everything they'd done for me. Every dollar, every hour, every meal. I stared at my plate and felt nothing. The breaking point had come and gone years earlier. This was just debris. I hope you understand the debt you've built, my father said as I picked up my bag and headed for the door. I turned to him and said, I do. It wasn't anger. It was a promise. College was survival. My peers partied, dated, wasted time. I worked. I interned. I built connections. I learned law in my electives, financial systems in my sleep. While others took spring breaks, I took extra certifications. I didn't go to college to find myself. I went to weaponize myself. By 23, I was working for a private equity firm in Chicago. By 25, I launched a platform that helped underprivileged students apply for aid anonymously, bypassing abusive parental oversight, a system I wished had existed when I was a kid. I called it Clear Path. It blew up. 3 months after our Series B round, I cleared $1. $6 million in personal equity. And that's when I got the letter. No return address, just a cream-colored envelope and shaky handwriting. Inside, a 2-page, handwritten demand from Margaret and Douglas Vale. We provided you with life, shelter, food, discipline, and education. We are owed compensation for raising a child who is now benefiting from our investment. After discussing this thoroughly, we feel $500,000 is a fair figure. They even itemized it. $180,000 for housing, $120,000 for education and utilities, $200,000 in parental guidance, emotional development, and supervision. And at the bottom, in my mother's precise script. A debt is a debt, Ethan. We expect payment within 90 days. Family should honor family. No signature, just a demand. I stared at that letter for hours. I had always known they'd try to come back for a piece. I just hadn't expected them to be so bold. They thought I was still the scared little boy who'd lower his head and say, "Yes, ma'am." They thought they could guilt me into payment, guilt me into obedience again. But the thing about debts is, they can be audited. And the thing about silence? Sometimes, it's just the sound of a loaded gun before the trigger is pulled. I didn't respond to their letter right away. For a few days, I let it sit on the marble countertop of my apartment, beside a chilled glass of bourbon and the occasional package delivery from a life they'd never touched. Margaret and Douglas Vale had no idea who I'd become. They had crafted a prison out of guilt, but they'd never imagined the prisoner might escape, thrive, and return with blueprints for demolition. Still, I didn't act immediately. Revenge, if it was to be done, had to be crafted. Not shouted. Not fumbled. Engineered. On day 6, the second letter arrived. This one typed. Polished. Sent through a firm in Evansville, Chambers and Holt Family Recovery Consultants. A made-up firm, I would later find, created for the sole purpose of lending their petty demand legitimacy. They'd actually hired someone to formalize their extortion attempt. The tone was colder, clinical. Dear Mr. Ethan Vale, we are contacting you on behalf of our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Douglas Vale, regarding financial obligations stemming from your upbringing and their sustained investment in your development as a child and adult. They called me a beneficiary of parental capital. They even attached a breakdown of costs, with a footnote citing emotional labor and guidance metrics valued at $85 per hour. I laughed, out loud, alone in my penthouse. Not because it was funny, but because of the insane audacity it took to bill someone for the childhood they spent dismantling him. They had taken everything from me that made childhood bearable, and now they wanted a return on investment? They believed they were creditors. And so, I decided I would pay them, just not the way they imagined. First, I needed to test them. I replied to the letter with a phone call, masked, of course, by my legal assistant. I wanted it recorded, documented, filed. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Vale, said a voice they'd never heard, representing an imaginary law office in downtown Chicago. Mr. Vale is open to discussing a structured repayment plan, but would like a clearer understanding of your expectations. And they sang. They wanted a public acknowledgement, a notarized contract, monthly deposits into a joint account they'd already opened. They wanted dinners, holidays, tribute in both dollars and attention. Margaret demanded reconciliation publicly. They thought I was bending. In reality, I was building my exhibit list. By week 2, I'd hired a real legal team. Not just attorneys, but strategic legal analysts. One of them, a sharp, gleaming woman named Candace Varelli, had made her name gutting inheritance claims from narcissistic parents across the Midwest. I gave her everything. My childhood journals, my school reports, the psychological evaluations I'd hidden in college, screenshots of texts, voice memos, notes from neighbors who'd witnessed the cold violence in our house. She read through it all and, after an hour of silence, looked me dead in the eye. You have grounds, she said. They opened this door. Now let's make them walk through it. We began drafting the response. Not a rejection, an offer. I sent it as a letter, signed, certified, and sealed with all the legal trappings of seriousness. It read, Dear Douglas and Margaret, thank you for your recent communications regarding my financial obligations. I agree. Debts should be repaid. I appreciate your detailed invoice. It inspired me to do some accounting of my own. I've since reviewed the emotional, psychological, and developmental costs incurred during my upbringing and have determined there is, indeed, a debt, though perhaps not in the direction you imagined. Attached is a preliminary analysis of damages I suffered under your care, including, but not limited to, psychological trauma, anxiety disorders, medical bills, lost opportunities, and years of personal therapy to repair the human you attempted to dismantle. Total damage estimate, $720,000. I propose a negotiation. You may choose to drop all current demands within 10 business days, sign a no-contact agreement drafted by my legal representation, and this matter ends quietly. Or, I go public. I name names. I show receipts. You sued for compensation, Let's see how a court of law evaluates your parenting. Choose wisely. Sincerely, Ethan Vale. 10 days passed. Silence. Then came the voicemail. My mother's voice, cracked, less cold now, but shaking with indignation. You think you can threaten us? After everything we did for you? We gave you life, Ethan. We gave you food, clothes, rules. You want to humiliate us publicly? Don't forget who you are. Don't forget your blood. I played it again and again, because every time I heard it, I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't trying to ruin their lives. I was trying to balance the equation. They didn't drop the claim. Instead, they escalated. They found a sleazy lawyer in their county, Gene Wexler, a man once disbarred in Kentucky, who agreed to represent their fabricated parental compensation case. And they filed. Not quietly. Local news got wind of it almost immediately. An adult son being sued by his aging parents for childhood repayment fees. The headline alone sparked outrage, mockery, and fascination. But I didn't go public yet. Not yet. Because it was too early for noise. First, I needed to finish digging. I flew to Indiana, rented a quiet car, wore a plain jacket, and returned to Norwood Drive one last time. The house looked smaller now, right at the edge of the shingles. Paint peeling, lawn uncut. No more performances. No more neighbors to impress. I knocked. My father answered. His face registered shock, then smugness. Well, look who finally came home, he said. I stepped inside, glanced around. The same furniture. Same faded photos on the wall. Same cold air. You're making a mistake, I said calmly. We're making a correction, he replied. He offered me coffee. I declined. Then I told them, if you want this to go public, I will oblige. If you want a trial, I will drag out every detail, every document, every breath of abuse you ever dealt. And if you think you can guilt me, think again. I stopped feeling guilty the day I stopped feeling anything for either of you. My mother slapped me. It didn't hurt. Not compared to everything else. I turned and left. Outside, I finally exhaled. The war had begun, and for the first time in my life, it was on my terms. They wanted payment. They were about to learn what interest really meant. Litigation is rarely about truth. It's about leverage, and I had more than enough. My parents wanted to drag me into court, into the light of public attention, and force me to submit to their version of reality. The ungrateful son, the selfish millionaire, the spoiled brat, who forgot where he came from. I was about to show them exactly where I came from. By week 1 of the court filing, the case had made it onto local Indiana news. A mid-tier affiliate station ran the headline. Parents sue successful son for cost of raising him. The anchor chuckled while reading it. That's one way to plan for retirement. I said nothing publicly, but my team worked around the clock. Candace Varelli and 2 paralegals tore through every box of my past like it was evidence in a federal crime. And in some ways, it was. We didn't need to stretch the truth. We didn't need to exaggerate. The truth was already brutal. We organized it meticulously. Volume 1. Psychological Evaluations. My diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, beginning at age 11. My therapy records from college. Volume 2. Testimonies. High school teachers who'd noticed bruises or behavioral red flags. A neighbor who once heard my father call me a failed investment. Volume 3. Digital evidence. Emails, voicemails, texts. Screen grabs of my mother texting me things like, "We gave you life. We can take it back if you keep talking this way." We weren't just building a defense. We were preparing a counteroffensive. Then came Daria Knoll. I hadn't seen her since we were 17. Back in high school, we shared a chemistry class. She was sharp, sarcastic, and always wore black nail polish. I remembered once, my father had seen me talking to her at school and grounded me for a month. "She looks like trash," he'd said. "You're not here to socialize." Daria was now a journalist for Renline Media, an independent investigative outlet with a reputation for exposing small-town corruption and family court scandals. She contacted me via encrypted email. "Ethan, I saw the case. I remember the way your parents were. I've always remembered. If you want to talk, I'll make sure the truth is documented the way it should be. No spin. Just clarity." Daria. At first, I ignored her. But then the smear campaign began. A blog appeared. Then a fake Twitter account. They painted me as a narcissist, a greedy tech bro who'd abandoned his family for money. The posts all used the same phrases. He owes his parents everything. What kind of man profits and forgets those who raised him? Candace traced the IPs. They came from my parents' hometown. The authors were anonymous, but the language? That was pure Margaret Vale, syrupy, performative, and manipulative. She was trying to rewrite the narrative. Fine. So I gave Daria a call. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Chicago. She hadn't changed much, just sharper eyes and a leather bag full of legal pads. I told her everything. Let her record it. Showed her the files, the documents, the letters. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she asked only one question. Do you want people to know what they did? Or do you want to make sure they never do it again? Both, I said. Then we start with exposure. But surgical. Strategic. That night, her piece went live. The price of raising Ethan Vale. When parents sue for love rendered as debt. It wasn't just an article, it was a weapon. It documented the abuse. It included audio from my childhood, one clip where my father screamed at me for dropping a plate at age 12. It cited medical records, therapy notes. It ended with a line that hit like a blade. What do we owe those who raised us in fear? It went viral within 48 hours. Suddenly, national attention poured in. Major outlets picked it up. People chose sides. The Valles had become a national symbol, not of parental sacrifice, but of toxic entitlement. And just like that, they lost the power of silence. But exposure was only part one. Legally, their case was still on the docket. And now, it was time to unmake them from the inside out. We filed our counterclaim. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Negligent parenting with lasting psychological harm. Attempted financial coercion via fraudulent claim. And because of the digital harassment campaign they had launched, we added cyber defamation. The court approved every line. A deposition was scheduled. They were forced to testify under oath. It was closed door, but I got the transcript. Margaret Vale, we raised him. We made sacrifices. We deserve compensation. That's how family works. Attorney, you wrote this text. You were born to serve us. Can you explain? Margaret, it was said in frustration. Attorney, you said it multiple times over the course of 15 years. Douglas Vale, our son has been poisoned by the media. He thinks he's better than us. Attorney, he left home with no support and built a company from nothing. Does that suggest incompetence on his part or yours? Silence. And then, the breaking point. Margaret admitted that the blog was hers. She'd written every post, sent fake tips to tabloids, and even tried to bribe a former friend of mine into claiming I'd hit her in college. It was all recorded. Candace smiled when she handed me the affidavit. This, she said, is the hammer. I sat in my apartment, alone that night, watched the news cycle spin around my last name. And for once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a terrified boy hiding behind closed doors while someone pounded their fists on the kitchen table. I felt calm, because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice, carved clean and cold, and handed to those who thought the world owed them a kingdom for birthing a prisoner. And soon, they'd get their answer in court. They walked into the courtroom like it was a church. Margaret wore navy blue and a string of pearls. Douglas had on a beige blazer, slightly too tight across the shoulders. He refused to make eye contact with me. She did. Her gaze lingered, confident, smug, like she thought this was a family reunion, not a reckoning. The courtroom was modest, civil court, Indiana County. Rows of wooden benches, beige walls, the scent of furniture polish and sweat. A judge who looked like she hated everything before the day began. My legal team sat in full silence, 5 strong, led by Candace Varelli, whose calm stare could strip paint. I wore a tailored black suit and a navy tie. No expression, no weakness, and no apologies. The Valles had filed their suit for financial reimbursement for upbringing costs. It had no legal precedent. It was delusion wrapped in ego, but the judge had allowed it to proceed on technical grounds. The claim referenced a verbal contract. That was their entire argument, that at age 16, I had once said, "I'll pay you back someday." 16. In the kitchen, after a dinner where I had been screamed at for getting a B+ in chemistry. They had found a tape, recorded without my consent, where I muttered those words in frustration. "I'll pay you back someday, just leave me alone." They'd clung to it like scripture. The trial lasted 5 days. 5 days of lies, theatrics, unraveling. Day 1 was theirs. They made their case to the jury. Douglas gave his opening statement, a performance soaked in fake humility. "We raised Ethan without complaint. We sacrificed our lives. We denied ourselves vacations, luxuries, dreams. Also, he could succeed. And now he denies us. What parent deserves that? Margaret wept. Real tears. She always could cry on command. All we wanted was a little help. He shut us out. He forgot us. They brought in old photo albums, birthday pictures, report cards. They tried to paint the illusion that they were loving, devoted, proud. The courtroom was quiet. The jury listened. Some even nodded. But Candace sat calmly beside me. She had seen this script before. Narcissists always start with honey. Day 2 belonged to us. Candace stood up and addressed the jury with precise, steady cadence. This is not about parental rights. This is about control. Emotional control disguised as love. Financial manipulation disguised as compensation. You will see a pattern, not of parenting, but of exploitation. Then she laid out the evidence. Medical records, my documented anxiety at age 10, psychological evaluations. 2 therapists had labeled my upbringing coercive and emotionally hazardous. Emails and voicemails. My parents referring to me as an investment, a resource, and once, in my father's own words, a goddamn stock we raised to cash out later. The courtroom shifted. Day 3 was testimony. I took the stand. Candace guided me through. No dramatics. No theatrics. Just facts. I told them about how I wasn't allowed to speak at dinner. About being grounded for looking sad in public. About Margaret burning my college acceptance letters before I found new copies online. About Douglas screaming for 20 minutes because I missed one spot while mowing the lawn. I told them how they never hugged me without a reason. How love was withheld, rationed, weaponized. And then I read one of my journal entries aloud. Age 14. Today Mom said I'm a disappointment. Dad said I'll die poor. I wonder if I ran away, would they even notice? The courtroom was silent. A juror blinked rapidly. Another rubbed his eyes. Then Candace played the tape. Douglas Vale's voice. You'll never amount to anything. We built you. You don't exist without us. You'll pay us back for every *****ing second we wasted raising you. No one looked at them the same after that. Day 4 was cross-examination. They tried to discredit me. Said I was mentally unstable. Said I was vengeful. But then Candace brought up the blog. The anonymous hate site. The fake Twitter campaign. All created by Margaret Vale. She denied it. Until we showed the IP match. And the metadata on the fake posts. All written on her home computer. I was just trying to get people to see the truth, Margaret mumbled. The judge raised her eyebrows. The jury stared. That was the moment the illusion broke. Day 5 was closing statements. Candace stood calmly and said, "This is not a child turning on his parents. This is a survivor holding his abusers accountable. They are not victims of neglect. They are perpetrators of psychological debt. And when their investment didn't yield obedience, they turned to the courts, hoping to force submission through law the same way they did through fear." Then she walked to the plaintiff's table and dropped their own invoice onto it. They billed him for love. Let that sink in. The courtroom held its breath. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Then they returned. Verdict. The Vala's claim for compensation? Denied. My counterclaim? Upheld. Damages awarded. $820,000. Plus legal fees, plus a permanent no-contact order. The judge's final remarks were brief and brutal. Parenthood is not a transaction. What you did was not parenting. It was preparation for control. And you failed. Margaret wept again. No one cared. Douglas didn't speak. He didn't move. I stood, straightened my cuffs, nodded once to the judge, and I walked out. Outside, the reporters waited. I ignored them. Inside me, there was no joy, no victory dance, just silence. The good kind. The silence of freedom. The headlines did most of the work. Parents sue son for cost of raising him. Lose and owe $800,000 in damages. Indiana couple ordered to pay after emotional abuse lawsuit by their own son. Parental entitlement meets its reckoning in Vale versus Vale. It spread like fire in dry grass. Morning talk shows debated it. Legal blogs dissected it. Reddit turned it into a morality play. Some people hated me. Said I was heartless. Said I'd embarrassed my poor aging parents. Others called me a hero. A symbol. A message. You don't owe those who broke you. I ignored all of them. This wasn't for the public. It was for me. And for the first time in my life, I had no leash around my neck. Margaret and Douglas Vale vanished from the spotlight almost overnight. The home I grew up in was listed for sale within 2 weeks of the verdict. A foreclosure warning appeared in the public records shortly after. My mother's Facebook profile went dark. My father's LinkedIn was deleted. Through my attorney, I learned they tried to set up a GoFundMe to cover the court judgment. It barely broke $300. Turns out, it's hard to crowdsource sympathy when your son just spent 5 days detailing the psychological cage you welded around his childhood. They tried appealing. Of course they did. Their new lawyer lasted 3 weeks before quietly withdrawing. I imagine even bottom feeders have a threshold. Candace had already frozen the judgment, filed liens on any assets they owned. One car, the last of their retirement savings, a modest stock portfolio. It was all mine now, technically. I didn't touch a cent. I had the legal right to drain them, to bury them under the weight of every dollar they said I owed. Instead, I instructed Candace to lock the funds in escrow, where they would sit, gathering dust and interest, until I decided what to do. Revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's a slow, silent suffocation. A few weeks after the verdict, I got an email. Anonymous, no subject line, no signature. Just a message. You will regret this. You've cursed your own blood. Family is sacred. You'll die alone. I recognized the cadence. It was Margaret's, even if she hadn't signed it. I read it once, then archived it. And then, things got quiet. For the first time since childhood, I stopped checking over my shoulder. No surprise phone calls. No sudden visits. No veiled threats disguised as holiday greetings. There was a silence I didn't recognize, a clean, unfamiliar one. My apartment in Chicago finally felt like mine, not a temporary shelter from the past. I stopped bolting the door at night. I started sleeping with the lights off. I started dreaming in color again. A month later, Daria Knoll reached out. The journalist. The girl with the black nail polish from high school who had believed me before the world did. She wanted to do a follow-up. I think people need closure, she said over the phone. Not just a headline. The real after. So I agreed. We met again, this time in a small studio with soft lighting and black walls. No audience. Just a camera and her questions. She asked what justice felt like. I told her it didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Do you still think of them? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, not as people. More like shadows. We grow up in darkness. And once we learn how to live in light, we don't go looking for what cast the shadow. We just move forward. The interview aired. It was clean, unemotional, stark. The final quote spread across the internet in hours. Parents don't automatically deserve your life just because they gave you one. Love is earned. So is respect. Abuse is not a debt the child is required to pay. I received over 4,000 emails. Some angry, most grateful. Stories from strangers with different last names but the same wounds. I didn't reply to many of them, but I read every single one. And for every message I received, I knew I'd done something that went beyond the courtroom. Meanwhile, Margaret and Douglas slipped deeper into obscurity. Candace tracked their financials as a matter of protocol. Margaret took a job at a roadside diner 3 towns over. Hostess, weekends only. Douglas tried freelance construction. He hadn't filed taxes in years. They were living in a rented 1-bedroom apartment behind a strip mall outside Terre Haute. It was poetic in a way. The same people who demanded $500,000 for parenting services now couldn't afford Wi-Fi. They still owed me over $700,000. It didn't matter. The real price had already been paid. People kept asking if I felt sorry for them. If I ever wondered what would happen if they apologized. If I regretted destroying my family. But there's a mistake in that question. You can't destroy something that never existed. What we had wasn't a family. It was a hierarchy. And I didn't burn the house down. I just turned on the lights and let the rot show. Sometimes, I pass by homes that look like mine once did. Perfect lawns. 2 cars. Christmas lights and neat lines. I wonder how many kids inside are surviving, not living. And I wonder how many of them are planning, like I did, to break the cycle. Not escape it. End it. It's been 3 years. The court files are sealed. The story's old news. The headlines have faded beneath newer scandals, fresher tragedies. My name hasn't trended in over a year. And still, people ask, whatever happened to Ethan Vale? The answer is, nothing dramatic. I still live in Chicago. My company, ClearPath, expanded nationwide. We helped over 20,000 students apply for college without needing parental signatures, something that once seemed impossible to me at 17, locked behind my father's rules and my mother's guilt. Our platform now supports minors escaping guardianship abuse, housing insecurity, and financial dependence on exploitative parents. We even launched a legal aid fund in my name. That part wasn't my idea. Candace insisted. I didn't fight her on it. My life is quiet now. No tabloids. No lawsuits. No Margaret. No Douglas. Their last contact came in the form of a certified letter 6 months after the trial. It was handwritten, like the first one, and smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I opened it slowly, half out of curiosity, half out of instinct. Inside, a single sentence. We still believe you owe us. No signature. No address. Just that. I tore it in half and fed it to the sink disposal without a word. That was the last time they reached out. I've heard rumors. That they moved again. That Douglas had a heart attack, but survived. That Margaret teaches piano to neighborhood kids out of their rented apartment, where the walls are too thin and the heater only works half the time. I don't track them. I don't need to. Their names live behind glass in my mind. Not broken, not sharp, just dusty exhibits in a closed gallery. Sometimes, I wonder if they ever sit in silence and wonder where they went wrong. But narcissists don't self-reflect. They reconstruct. In their version of the story, they were martyred by an ungrateful son. They won't say we hurt him. They'll say he turned on us. Let them. The truth doesn't require their approval. Last fall, I returned to Norwood Drive. Not to the house. Someone else lives there now, a young couple with a toddler who giggled when I walked past the sidewalk. They'd painted the shutters green, planted a maple tree out front. Good. Let the house forget us. Let it grow something better. I spoke at a university the following week. A guest lecture. Law and ethics in non-traditional family cases. The auditorium was full. Most of the students had read the case files, watched the interviews, dissected every inch of my story for their papers. At the end, one of them, a thin boy with sharp shoulders and tired eyes, asked a question. If you could go back, would you forgive them? The room was dead quiet. I smiled just slightly. Not cruel, just honest. Forgiveness isn't required for closure. It's optional, like dessert. I'm not hungry for it. He nodded, quietly, like he understood more than he let on. Afterward, a woman approached me. Early 30s, simple clothes, nervous eyes. She said her name was Rachel. She told me her father kept her bank card locked in his safe until she turned 20. That she hadn't been allowed to move out until a boyfriend helped her escape. That she still woke up at night expecting the sound of his voice down the hall. She cried when she thanked me. Not because I'd saved her. I hadn't. I'd just made it okay for her to name what happened. That was enough. Now, sometimes I write. Not for the public. Not for catharsis. Just to make sense of silence. I write about debt. Legacy. The invisible scars of control. I write about children who were raised like property, not people. I write about how some chains don't rattle. They wrap around the soul, so quietly that you forget they're there until someone shows you what freedom sounds like. And in that freedom, I built my life. No one owns me. No one speaks for me. No one calls me late at night and says, "You owe us." The debt has been cleared, and the only inheritance I carry now is myself.